Hello my friends, and welcome to Charnel Valley, home of the Tomb Kings. Sounds like a real pleasant beach vacation, right? I'm sure Anakin would love it here. Tzeentch is invading, as they are wont to do. They're led by the Blue Scribes, a unique and colorful pair of horrors looking for lost fragments of spells. It's a very good faction for dealing with the Tomb Kings, but still, Settra has some spicy tactics up his sleeves to kick the Raven God out of the desert for good. So, in their current form, the twins are probably overcosted, but they have some really unique and fun mechanics that might just help them against the Tomb Kings here. They start the battle with a random selection of 6 spells, and every time they cast, all of them are randomly replaced once again. From the lore of Hasha to the spells with Grey Seers, the dreaded 13th, Wind of Death, zombie summons, what have you, pretty much any spell in the game can come forth from these bad boys, and they can pull off some spectacular moments if Mr. RNGesus is on their side. As magic is cast around them, their spell mastery will build, dealing more damage and gaining other bonuses. Plus, they have a goofy Estus to ride on, and they have very small HP pool, terrible combat stats, so you don't want to be fighting Settra with them in melee. But that's just the hero slot. For the Lord choice, there's a Chaos Sorcerer Lord of Tzeentch, rocking the Lord Medal and a Chaos War Shrine, Giver of Arcane Glory, should add to the spell mastery, if not stack, once it gets to 20%, and the power recharge rate will help the Blue Scribes as well. And he's wielding the Sword of Change for Chaos Spawn summons. Infantry selections comprised of Blue Horrors, Zongors, Furies, and Marauders, with some Screamers overhead. Very useful unit against constructs because they're AP and bonus versus large. And the Knights of Immolation, parked above the high ground. Searing Torrent lets them drop steaming turds on their enemies and basically explode any skeleton formation into so many bits of dust and debris. It could be a really annoying unit for the Tomb Kings to deal with. It can harass the back line, shut down Ushabti Great Bows, and generally just be anywhere they are needed on the battlefield. The Eyes of the Desert Sepulchral Stalkers will be defending Ushabti Great Bows. This is a shooting build for the Tomb Kings. There are 3 Ushabti Great Bows, which they have a lot of work to do in this one, because first they have to get through the barrier, then they have to deal with important targets like the War Shrine, all while Doom Knights and Screamers and Furies are diving into harry and harass them. Chosen of the Gods are in there too, to help clear out any elite halberds from range, but melee is where this battle might be decided. Settra the Imperishable on his Khemrian War Sphinx can certainly add a lot of power to an army that way. Blessed Blade of Patra for dueling, Wrath of Patra to clear out infantry, and those 2 spells you often see with him, Nero's Incantation of Protection and Jaff's Incantation of Cursed Blades. Those 2 are very spammable spells, very cheap, low cooldown, and they are constantly going to proc that map-wide heal from Realm of Souls, which is probably the most important thing. Now, Nero's Incantation of Protection for the 40% physical resist does nothing for the Tomb Kings in this situation, because it's physical resistance, which is bypassed by magical attacks. Tzeentch only has magical attacks, so you're not bringing that spell because you're like, oh, it's going to make me tanky. It won't make you any tankier, which is unfortunate. It's a big loss for the Tomb Kings, actually. The reason it's still brought here is just to help proc that Realm of Souls and the map-wide healing. Nero's and Jeff's are the 2 cheapest. They have the most uptime with the Lore of Nakara passive. They are the play. I always love calling Jaff's Incantation Jeff's, because it reminds me of 22 Jump Street when Channing Tatum's all like, "My name's Jeff!" But yeah, it's been a while since we saw the glorious War Kitty run roughshod over an enemy horde. Always quite the spectacle, and all things considered, a bit of a less scary army than normal when it comes to threats to the War Sphinx itself. We'll usually see at least some elite halberds, but Tzeentch skipped most of that for a wider build here with ways to dive the back line, and of course, experimenting with the expensive but very cool looking, very entertaining Blue Scribes overhead. So for now, Settra should be fairly safe. Diving into the infantry, running them over, getting rid of some of this chaff before the main lines truly clash. But the Volcano from the lore of Hasha coming out and immediately deleting a full unit of skeletons. That is the first spell we've seen from the Blue Scribes. It will certainly not be the last. And remember, every time they cast one, it'll be a full new selection of 6 spells. Quite the variety, quite an arcane deluge on the way. Speaking of arcane deluge, take a look at the Knights of Immolation, like pigeons at Central Park, plopping some fat deuces on the skellies down below, and that was well positioned. Immediately, 5,000 HP and 50 models incinerated, opening up an avenue of attack into the Tomb King's secondary battle line. Keeping those Ushabti Great Bows online and firing into the heavy armor of this Tzeentch build is going to prove really difficult with all the Furies, all the Flyers they have on this battlefield. Eyes in the Desert are holding down the top of the canyon, but it's not really their role. They do have infantry support, so they'll be fine. They have plenty of melee defense, so they're certainly not going to drop to Zongors particularly quickly. They should be able to win that engagement, but it's not really their role. They'd prefer to be in and amongst some expensive elite cavalry or something of that nature. And we're seeing Tzeentch now attempt to dive into the rear and begin tying down these shooters. The Ushabti Greatbow are about to be under a tremendous amount of pressure. Ushabti Greatbows have a nice firing line from the top of the canyon, shooting into the Arcane Sorcerer for the moment, but some of them already being tied down by Screamers of Tzeentch, who will have support from Skeleton Spearmen and the charges of Settra's War Kitty. Now, the Kymrian War Sphinx is by no means specialized for fighting large targets, and really not specialized for duels either, but when he activates Overcast version of Jaff's Incantation of Cursed Blades, he gets plus 16 bonus versus large, which is really helpful. You add on top of that the Blessed Blade of Petra, and suddenly he becomes pretty effective in that role. He's always going to be an infantry grinder, fantastic for clearing out hordes, and has one of the most impactful charges in the entire game, because the animations of the War Kitty are fantastic for just killing 30, 40, 50 models on a single charge if you go down the length of their line like a wind spell, but he can still do okay in those monstrous duels when Jaff's Incantation of Cursed Blades is up. And this is what I'm talking about. When we're talking about how interesting the Blue Scribes are, how fun their little games can be. They've summoned Plague Monks from the Pope of Pestilence to do their bidding. That is a great spell in this situation, having a Pestilent Burst summon, because they're awesome for killing skeletons, and good enough in melee to probably kill great bows too. As an opponent, there's just no way to know what spells they have or what they're casting until it's already happening, and by then, it might be too late. Eyes of the Desert Sepulchral Stalkers have set up on the flank of the Zongor. A couple more volleys should be enough to see those Zongors running for the hills. But a lot of the Great Bows are also running for their lives right now. Had to get away from the Plague Monk summon, which will leave them isolated so the Knights of Immolation can swoop down from above. And those Furies and Screamer combos also putting tons of pressure on the Tomb King's back line, and it's not an easy fight to get rid of those Flyers. Screamers are not exactly tanky, but they're not really squishy either. Stalkers don't have particularly large melee attack. Even with their bonus for large active, they gotta get through the barrier first, and when there are Furies thrown in there as well, those are infantry-sized targets, makes it all the more difficult for the Stalkers to hold the line. The Necropolis Knights would do a better job in that role, probably, but they're also a lot more expensive, and the Halberd variant, certainly not good versus infantry either. Ushabti Summon has been activated, got very tired of those Knights of Immolation, got a big statue summoned directly on top of them, and gonna manage to kill some models here, prevent the majority of that unit from escaping. They're on their last legs now. Eyes in Desert came back, trying to get some shots in, and this is why you bring these Sepulchral Stalkers in some backline sweeper type situations, because they have the additional benefit of that shooting, which could pay huge dividends against someone like that Sorcerer atop the Chaos War Shrine, or against the Blue Scribes if they don't ever want to land. Again, getting through that barrier may prove difficult. What is not proving difficult for Settra right now, though, is his duel with that Chaos War Shrine. Jaff's Incantation of Cursed Blades giving them the plus 16 bonus versus large, making that a really lopsided fight, to the point where he's had to flee and then summon the Sword of Change, Chaos Spawns, to give him a little bit of bodyguard cushion and support while he gets the hell out of dodge. So Settra, with his Blessed Blade of Petra, definitely doing big time work for the Tomb Kings right now. The canyon fight up top has gone well for the Warriors of Numos. Down below, though, Tzeentch seems to be gaining the upper hand, especially now with the help of those Chaos Spawn summons. They're going to be able to rampage through the remaining infantry down here, and the Warriors of Numos will have to scramble back. Arcane Unforging now being sent the way of Settra the Imperishable. It's a single target spell. It's actually not in a very good state right now. There were moments where it was pretty good in Warhammer 2. It seems to be pretty underwhelming at the moment. Both have changed. Second army ability for Tzeentch coming in to help out as well, but you can see the Stalkers crumbled out down here. So did the Chosen of the Gods and the Ushabti Greatbows down below. The Flyers have proved too much for the Tomb Kings, and they're left with a very small army at this point. Balance bar is shifting in the favor of Tzeentch, but Zongor cannot fight Settra and his War Kitty, and if somehow the Imperishable can keep his Stalkers, the Eyes in the Desert, online and firing, or at least defending in melee and not immediately getting swarmed, well then they might be okay. Problem is, it's going to be really difficult to keep those stalkers in a healthy and safe position. There's a lot of infantry coming over these dunes, and they're coming in for blood, or bone, rather. It looks like Settra's in a really precarious position at the moment. There is a unit of skeletons over up on top of the canyon that might be able to join the battle at some point, but it'll take a while for them to trundle over. Nero's Incantation of Protection and Enfeebling Foe have been activated. We can see how the Arcane Sorcery is actually improving the efficacy of those spells as well. Normally, Enfeebling Foe is minus 24 melee defense, minus 24 melee attack. It's actually minus 33 for both right now, because the spell masteries are stacking together and making those spells even more impactful. So that could be, well, I would say it would be really important in the coming duels here, but of course, after you cast the Enfeebling Foe, the entire selection of spells will switch once again. So we don't even know what the Blue Scribes will be casting next, and frankly, neither do they. But the Knights of Immolation and that legendary hero are back into the thick of the fighting once again. Nero's Incantation of Protection gonna do a fat load of nothing in terms of physical resistance. All that will be bypassed. Bullgorger actually coming out from the lore of the Great Maw, hitting those Knights of Immolation, giving them some additional melee attack and damage in CQB. Settra coming in with a big charge and still casting Nero's to make sure that both him and his stalkers get some additional regen. And it looks like the Blue Scribes have just lost their barrier overshield. They will need to take off back to the sky momentarily, or Settra will rip them inside out by their buttholes. More infantry is coming in now. Here comes the Chaos Sorcerer Lord on his Chaos War Shrine. Settra realizes that that is really the linchpin of this army. If they lose the leadership from him, that will force the Blue Horrors to ground. If both of those die, leadership for the Tzeentch army is not going to hold up. They only have 2 models left on the Knights of Immolation. They still have some infantry here, but the Kemrian War Sphinx could kill almost limitless numbers of those, and he just hit them all with the curse as well. Big time AoE effect once he drops below, I think 33% health or something like that. That's a big time nuke. A lot of damage in a large AoE, and now Tzeentch is getting a little bit desperate because they're sensing a mass rout. Gaze of Nagash magic missile, one you don't see very often, just hit Settra in the ass, and that's what triggered the curse to activate. Half of the army is split off, going after the eyes in the desert. Half of them have stayed behind with the Chaos Sorcerer Lord to help deal with Settra. He has activated his Blessed Blade of Patra once again. That Chaos Sorcerer Lord is not having a good time this battle at all. He spent most of the battle just running for his life from that Kemrian War Sphinx. And the Eyes in the Desert, while not exactly being fast, Stalkers do have enough mobility to get a little bit of space, especially if they have some support from Skeleton Spearmen coming in, and now they might get a couple of volleys off into that Chaos Sorcerer Lord, who does not have his barrier overshield active at the moment. And look at that HP bar. It was around 2,500. First volley took him down about 500 or so. Might be enough to rout him from this battlefield, and that will leave Settra in a really good position. And the Blue Scribes might have just been off more than they can chew here. This is one of the cool things about the Stalkers as a unit, and why I love their rework, which happened a long time ago at this point. But initially, they used to be only anti-infantry with their shots and kind of a very inaccurate spread shot. It didn't force players into making a tough choice. With the way they work now, their high velocity, AP volleys, and good accuracy makes people scared of their shooting, and they scramble to tie them up in melee to stop them, but in so doing are then exposed to their bonus for large and armor-piercing polearms up close. So what happened right there, where the Blue Scribes were like, oh no, my Chaos Sorcerer Lord is dying, I gotta charge into melee to stop them from firing, and they did so, but then immediately became surrounded. Settra came in for the rear charge, and they were sent screaming back into the portal to the warp. They're back in the realm of Tzeentch now, and the army will crumble apart. Chaos has fallen this day. Settra will defend the Charnel Valley once again. And he was obviously the MVP that battle. He was a force of nature in every aspect of the game. 3,500 value, more than paid for himself, but one, activated that Lore of Nagakara passive map-wide to regen the entire army and keep his units on the field for longer than they would otherwise, even though they still kind of crumbled a little bit quickly there. I think Tzeentch did a really good job of shutting down the Ushabti Great Bows. None of them, including the Chosen of the Gods, did particularly well here. Really, the only 2 units on the Tomb King's side that did much of anything were the Kemrian War Sphinx and those Eyes in the Desert Sepulchral Stalkers. The rest of the army had a really challenging time faced with all of this relatively quick and tanky chaff, Zongors, Marauders, and those Flyers diving into the rear. The Blue Scribes Tzeentch had a great game. Really enjoyed watching that one back and just seeing what they were doing with their mixture of spells. Knights of Immolation were awesome as well. Not typically what you'll see from Tzeentch in this setup or in this matchup, because you want some halberds to deal with constructs, but there's some experimentation going on there for sure, and an enjoyable game nonetheless. So GG to HDS, and more content on the way very soon. Peace out.